The following compilation features unsettling and spine-chilling tales sourced from Reddit's horror communities. Reader discretion is strongly advised. These narratives may contain graphic descriptions, psychological distress, and themes that could unsettle sensitive individuals. Proceed with caution, as immersion into these eerie stories may provoke fear, unease, and sleep disturbances. Enter this realm of Reddit's creepy horror stories at your own risk, as the line between reality and the macabre may blur within these chilling narratives. Back in April of 2013, I went through something that I haven't been able to talk about. I was paid a significant amount of money to stay quiet, in return for signing a 10-year agreement to shut the hell up. Now that the time is up, I've considered my options. I could just let this go and never speak of it again. I won't gain anything from speaking out, and I got a lot to lose. But then again, this is just an anonymous post online. Words have less meaning that way. West Virginia. It was hotter than usual, without a whiff of wind. I was coming home from a visit to my aunt. She'd broken her leg and couldn't leave her house. I was making my way back home, taking the I-64 out of Lewisburg. It started with the radio. It was playing that one Macklemore song I'd heard 100 times over. The sound was cutting in and out in a quick staccato, then disappeared completely. I could hear cars honking up front as a line began to form. There was a sway in the trees, as if greater and greater pressure was being put on them. I could hear wind rushing against the left side of the car, forcing me to pull the other way to compensate. I closed the sunroof as a dust cloud blew past, staining the windshield. Then, a rumble. It sounded like thunder, but from the ground, like a groaning bellow, growing louder and clearer by the second. As it reached its peak, I could see trees toppling over. A small Kia got pushed off balance and swerved off the road. As the sound died down, the road devolved into chaos. Some were desperately changing lanes, others were stepping on the brakes. I got my door scraped as the car behind me sped past. The radio was playing an automated message, a local emergency alert, referred to as a geological event. We were asked to turn off all air conditioning, slow down, and divert to the nearest exit. It repeated in a monotone voice, geological event. No air conditioning. Slow down. Divert to nearest exit. Minutes passed. There was a line forming further down the road. Police officers blocking the lanes in all directions, leaving a highway exit as the only option. Some folks were trying to push past the barricades but were forced back at gunpoint. I could see officers wearing gas masks and riot shields. We were waved in. I followed the exit and got directed to the right. There was an open field that was used as a sort of impromptu parking lot. Cars were being waved in and parked in a way that boxed us in, leaving no room for us to open our doors in either direction unless we got parked at the edge. 4 lines of cars with about 10-15 vehicles per line. Surplus vehicles were directed further down the road. The place was packed. I got stuck in the second row, about 6 cars in. Pretty much everyone around me were on their phones. I didn't have anyone to call, but there seemed to be an issue getting a signal through. The radio was still repeating the emergency message. Voices were getting louder. A man 2 cars to my left leaned out of a gap in the door, screaming at the officers to answer his question. They responded immediately with a warning shot, straight into the air. Stay in your vehicle. They screamed, lock your doors. I'm not telling you again. A couple of folks were filming, but there seemed to be trouble uploading. We were losing bandwidth. It didn't take long until phone signals were completely blocked. I think a video or 2 of that officer firing into the air made it online. They were patrolling back and forth. We were told to stay in our vehicles. Windows up, doors closed and locked, engines off. I could hear people talking in the other cars. Someone said there'd been a natural gas leak from the geological event, and that combustible engines could spark an explosion. Others were talking about a terrorist attack. There were no answers, and the officers weren't eager to talk. After about an hour, things were getting ugly. People were hungry, thirsty, and restless. One officer stepped up on the front cars, handing out water bottles, crackers, and processed cheese slices. He had to step from one car to another, denting the hoods with his steel-tipped shoes. They were also handing out thick black plastic hygiene bags for people who needed to relieve themselves. Use them, seal them, drop them out the door, then lock up and wait. I'd crawled into the back seat, pulled down my cap, and tried to relax. I'd been playing some games on my phone, but the battery was running low. I wanted to save some, so I settled for having a nap instead. The sweat was stinging my eyes, not because of how warm it was, but because of how nervous I was. No matter what I did, I felt trapped, and the car felt smaller and smaller. I couldn't get out if I wanted to, and it physically hurt me to think about how little control I had. Is that what claustrophobia feels like? A couple of officers were discussing something by the front line. One of them had a white cotton glove on, which he used to wipe off the hood of one of the front cars. The glove was taken off and put into a bag, which in turn was sealed with a hot air gun. I was getting the impression that our cars had been covered in something. I wasn't the only one considering it. There were two college kids in the car to my left, and they were discussing it too. Anthrax, one of them said. Gotta be. Nah, gold dust. The other chuckled. They don't want to share. You know what? The first groaned. I honest to God hope you're right. You're not, but I hope you are. Fuck you. I joined in the conversation shortly after. I offered another explanation. Something combustible. Something that might blow up if we started our cars. They were willing to consider this. The car behind me couldn't hear us, but the driver held up a notebook with the text. If we don't know what it's got to be aliens. I couldn't tell if they were serious, but they weren't laughing about it. A man in his 50s and what looked like his daughter. There were a couple of other folks in the other cars. A man in a black shirt, sort of looked like a preacher without a collar. Two middle-aged women with a kid in the back seat. A fat man blaring Johnny Cash from his stereo. A couple with a teenage son who couldn't stop drumming on the windows. We'd been stuck for about maybe 2.5 hours, when a truck rolled in, one of those with a large water tank. It was unmarked, looked civilian. As it rolled in, they were calling out on the megaphone. We'll be hosing your vehicles down, they said. Keep everything locked and closed. Then we'll be covering your vehicle with protective plastic while we wait for it to dry. After that, we'll start letting you go in an orderly manner. I repeat. Most of us were relieved. It was only a matter of time now. It was getting dark. They were getting up on the cars, hosing them down thoroughly. It smelled of chlorine, so maybe they'd mixed something into the water. As they came to my car, they stepped up on it and double-checked the sunroof, making sure it was locked and secured. They sprayed the car down, bathing it in chemical stink, the kind that gets stuck to the back of your throat. It took a long time for them to finish, at least an hour or two. After that, they were rolling out a kind of plastic cover at the short side of the lot, the kind you use to protect pools, or rain covers for football fields. They used 2 squad cars to slowly drape the thing over the entire lot, securing the edges with large rocks. Please stay calm, they called out as the plastic crawled over us. I know this is uncomfortable, but this is for your own safety. Once the cleaning is done, you will be free to go. Stay inside your vehicle at all times, I repeat. I did as I was told. I stayed inside, and I watched that plastic cover sweep over me. It felt like getting buried alive. All lights went out, leaving me in complete darkness, accompanied only by the vague, disembodied voices of the others. The college kids were talking about where they were going to go after this. Someone was honking, not sure if it was to show support or discontent. Someone else was cheering. I took my last swig of water, washing down my final plain cracker. I got back in the driver's seat. I could hear as they finished moving the plastic cover and parking their squad vehicles. I waited patiently, figuring it'd be maybe another hour or so. They hadn't really given us a timeline, but I could breathe a little easier. Sort of. I was going back and forth between feeling empowered with my hands on the wheel and feeling like I was stuck in a metal coffin. It was so dark, and everything smelt of plastic and chemicals, like a car wash stuck in time. As the excitement died down, I paid more attention to the background sounds. I tried to filter out the various discussions from the nearby cars, and somewhere in the distance, I heard raised voices. It wasn't coming from the cars, but the officers, whatever they were talking about. It was a heated discussion. An hour came and went, and people were getting impatient. More cars were honking, others were yelling, demanding answers. I couldn't get my leg to stop shaking. The more I thought about getting out of there, the smaller the car felt. I was hyper-focusing on things I couldn't control. I was a little thirsty, and I was out of water. I needed to use the bathroom. I wanted to stretch my legs and go for a walk. I wanted to breathe fresh air and get that awful chemical taste out of my mouth. I heard cars starting, accelerating. The truck was moving, somewhere off to the side. "We need you to stay in your vehicle," a voice screamed over the megaphone. "Do not leave. For any reason, stay in your vehicle." Cars speeding off. Not many, but a couple. Then quiet. The officers left us there. Everyone was quiet. A couple of folks had opened up their phones, using them as flashlights to look from car to car. Looking out at the sea of vehicles, all of us trapped under that dark cover. I could see a handful of lights cut off by sharp silhouettes. I couldn't make out who was who in the dark. It was all just people, anonymous. I heard a gasp somewhere in the back. There was a metallic clunk, like when the officers climbed atop our cars to get us our water. There was a careful cheer as some folks figured they were taking off the plastic cover. But that wasn't it. Instead, there were more footsteps. The cheers slowly died down as more and more footsteps pattered across our cars. I stopped counting after a downson. The silhouettes in the other cars were still. We all held our breaths, waiting for an answer to show itself. What the hell was going on? What was that sound? Somewhere off to my right, I heard a voice. "Who's up there?" It sounded like an older man. I'd seen a pickup truck that way earlier, almost as a response. The footsteps stopped. There was a faint clicking sound, like someone snapping their tongue against the roof of their mouth. Click, click, and from further away, a click in response. From somewhere to my left, another couple clicks. Then, a cascade of clicks, dozens, maybe hundreds. There was an awful metallic noise coming from my right. Then, breaking glass, a scream, cut short, followed by several irregular taps of the car horn. One of the silhouettes in the distance turned into a blur as something passed through the windshield, cutting through the plastic cover. Somewhere in the front row, the roof of a car was cut wide open. Someone was pulled up out of their seat. 2 cars back from where I was. There was more glass breaking. It sounded like a wild animal got in. I could see a weak hint of red spattered against the passenger side windows. I wasn't getting any air. I could feel my heart beating through my chest as my arms started shaking. My hands were cramped around the steering wheel, and I felt sweat dripping down my shoulders. I couldn't control it. I didn't even see what was going on. But these sounds, these screams, they awakened something primal. This was danger, a threat. My body knew long before I did. The college kids in the other car were ducking down. One of them waved a hand at me, as if telling me to get down. I nodded. I scrambled into the back seat. I couldn't see where I was putting my hands or my feet. Everything is different in the dark. As I tumbled my way over, my foot accidentally tapped the car horn. It was a quick tap, a fraction of a second. But to me, it was the loudest sound in the world. I was lying on my stomach in the back seat, and within seconds, something heavy climbed onto the hood of my car. I could feel the car buckling. It was much heavier than the man who'd passed out water bottles. I held my hands in front of my mouth to stop the panting, but I just ended up snorting up sweat instead. My nose stung as I bit my tongue, listening to every metallic groan as whatever was outside moved and shifted. Click, click, and from behind my car, a click in response. There were no lights being held up anymore. Everyone was cowering, going quiet. I pushed myself up against the door behind the driver's seat, trying to make myself as small as possible. I could hear the frame of the car complain as something slowly moved. When it came to my sunroof, there was a slight crack. That made it stop. Another crack. I silently shook my head, as if trying to ask the car to stop. That thing was going to break. And it did. My legs were showered with glass as a big blob of plastic cover dipped into my car. Something big came tumbling into the front seat, still covered in protective plastic. It twitched and spun around, its clicking turning from a careful question-like noise to a never-ending barrage. It was calling for help, alerting others, and it was cutting its way through the plastic. There were footsteps coming from every direction, some of them leaping from car to car, some of them leaping far enough to skip a car as they hurried. I was going to be swarmed within seconds. I fumbled with my hands, accidentally cutting my thumb on the broken glass. I managed to open the passenger side door, but even at its widest, and even when pressing into the college kid's car, it wasn't enough room to get out. Still, I had to try. I pressed myself into the gap and exhaled as much as I could, flattening my chest. While the thing thrashed around inside my car, I could feel my vision going faint. Black spots popped up at the edge of my vision. My arms were going weak, and yet by some miracle, I made it through. As my face hit the gravel of the makeshift parking lot, I felt the burn of residual chemicals. I swallowed my instinct to run, instead staying on my stomach, forcing myself to crawl under my car. There were more of them, some climbing on, some off. My chest was pressed to the ground as the weight shifted. I heard breaking glass from the windshield and tearing fabric. Something was stuck up there, and it was furious, like a trapped animal. I could hear the college kids mumbling to one another, trying to stay calm, one assuring the other that all they had to do was stay low, stay quiet, and wait. Then, something slammed into the passenger side door, the one I'd crawled out of. The door was pressed up against the neighboring car, then fell haphazardly to the ground, completely off the hinges. An ink-black, bird-like foot touched the ground right next to me. I've looked it up since. There were 3 toes forward, 1 toe backward, all clawed, anisodactyl feet, similar to that of many birds of prey, except larger than a human foot, and with smooth, oil-slick skin. It must have been heavy, at least 400 pounds. If the clicking noise came from its mouth, I can approximate that it was somewhere around 6'7" to 6'9", or taller. It could have been hunched over. How it managed to walk in the gap between the vehicles is beyond me, but I suspect it was very thin. It daintily walked from my car to the others, as if scanning for something. I could barely see anything in the dark, but this thing seemed to navigate it perfectly. It didn't bump into anything. There was a tap on the glass of the car behind me, to my right, and someone got startled. A short scream, and the hunt was on. This time was different. It must have caused some kind of chain reaction, as all of a sudden the plastic cover was getting torn up left and right. People were clawing their way out of their cars. I heard someone kicking against their windshield. Another was trying to open their door. I could hear it slamming against the side of the car next to them. And off in the distance, there was gunfire, just a couple of shots. The college kids in the car next to me slammed their doors open and followed my lead. They rolled onto the ground, and under their car, there was a little more light coming in as the cover had been torn above. Their faces were red from tears, and one of them was desperately trying to call for help on his phone. The other grabbed the phone out of his hand. A short scuffle ensued, ending with them putting on a ringtone and sliding the thing as far to the left as they could. Whatever car that phone landed under was demolished, every window broken, every passenger gone. I could hear the grinding as a seat was ripped in two and thrown away. In a matter of seconds, an entire vehicle was torn to pieces as a dozen of those things swarmed it. "Shut up," one of the college kids repeated. "Shut up, shut up, shut up." Something reached under my car. It scraped against the sole of my shoe, tearing a hole all the way to my big toe. I hurried forward, scurrying like a lizard. The college kids noticed and followed suit. I don't think they thought about it too much. It was just movement, and they went for it. I made it 2 cars down before I got stuck. There was something dark in the way, and I couldn't get around it without exposing myself. I couldn't see what it was, but it didn't take long for me to figure it out. There was a meaty crunch, as if someone was biting chunks out a piece of meat. It was struggling to get through the fabric of their clothes, making a snapping noise as threads gave way. A pool of blood rolled under the car, staining the tip of my fingers. It was still warm. One of those things were eating a victim. I hunkered down, trying to remember to breathe, and I stayed there, waiting for a chance. Any chance. I must have stayed there for at least an hour, hearing every bite, every crack of bone and snap of sinew, satisfied clicking noises. As it finished its meal, it wandered off, dragging the remains along. They were moving forward. Something heavy walked over the car I was hiding under, dragging a body along. Slowly, the footsteps disappeared. It was quiet again, and in that quiet, I found my footing. I made my way to the edge of the plastic cover. I listened one final time, pushed one of the weights away, and slipped through. They were gone, and I was out. I could feel my chest growing lighter, allowing me to breathe. I wanted to cry from relief. A breeze was picking up, drying the sweat on my brow and carrying the smell of grass. Stepping back, I turned towards the sea of cars to see how bad the damage was. And then I saw one. It was a bit off to the side, perching on top of an old Honda. At a glance, it looked like a tall person, covered in a slick black ink, but looking closer, you could see the strange bird-like feet, the pointed nails, the long row of shark-like teeth on a mouth that was far too wide. My Francie. The thing rose to its full length, easily over 7 feet tall. It looked ready to pounce on me. I had nothing to defend myself with. I couldn't make any sudden moves. I wouldn't even be halfway under the car before that thing would be over me. 100 thoughts raced through my mind, but there was nothing I could do. I was out of options, but the thing just looked at me. It raised a slice of raw meat. Blood dripped onto the plastic cover. It looked at me curiously, taking a bite. Then, as if nothing had happened, it wandered off, satiated. I was left there, shaking like a dry leaf, and with the last of those things gone, all that was left was the panic. It didn't take long for the officers to return. The plastic cover was removed, but we couldn't go home, not after this. Some folks signed a waiver and were let go immediately. They weren't allowed to talk about what they'd seen, and in return, they'd get a hefty sum of insurance money. Others demanded answers and were taken into custody for obstruction of justice. A few others still were too panicked to make any kind of sense and had to be checked out by medical personnel. A total of 14 people died. It was described by a combination of causes: a traffic pileup, carbon monoxide poisoning, animal attack. I think there was something about an escaped convict too. Excuses all over the place, and the times were all wrong, spread out through a couple of days to more smoothly blend into accident statistics. And if you wanted to go home and get your insurance money, you had to sign a non-disclosure. I did too. I know the college kids did as well. Goddamn miracle they made it out. But I saw them. 34 cars had to be towed, 18 people wounded, 6 seriously so. 4 people lost at least one limb. One guy had an arm ripped off halfway up his collarbone. I don't know how he survived. Most people never saw those things up close. They just remember the screams and the breaking glass. Sometimes, at night, that's all I hear too. Closing my eyes reminds me of lying under those cars. Feeling the pressure as the weight shifted, I still get trouble breathing. I think a part of me is still stuck there. It stayed in my vehicle. Tim held the magazine up to my face like he just found the Holy Grail. I snatched it out of his hands and studied the front cover. "Catgirls Off the Leash" was written in sultry red font at the top of the page. Below it was some anime chick with cat ears holding a Glock pointed right at the reader. "Tim, we've talked about this. I don't want to see your weird nudie mags, and I certainly don't want to see any cat-on-cat action." Tim grinned as he took back the magazine. "It's Monday. Anna, there's no actual cats in it. Just babes. Trust me, it's really hot." He flipped to another page near the middle. He moved his grimy finger across it, clearly looking for something to win me over. I turned away from him, trying my best to ignore his awkward attempt at camaraderie. Suddenly, he gasped, shoving the page in my face like a madman. "Look at her. Isn't she just the cutest? Her eyes sort of look like yours. That looks like a child. Actually, she's over 1 million years old. Sure. Her name is Natsuki. She comes from the planet. Tim. Seriously, I don't care. Take your anime porn somewhere else." Brushing his greasy blonde hair aside and adjusting his fingerless gloves, he got up from the bench and waddled over to the cafeteria. Thank God, if you couldn't tell already, I was never very good friends with Tim Chambers. That's a shame. Too, because we shared quite a bit in common. We were both nerdy, me more on the artistic side and him on the, for lack of a better word, neckbeard side. My best friend Ellie had unexpectedly moved away a few days before senior year started, and we were pretty much the only people who could stand each other. We still kept in contact by texting, but it wasn't nearly the same. Tim was more of a passive presence in my life. He would sit at the next table over from us at lunch and didn't seem to have many people to sit with him. Ellie and I did invite him to join us one time, and we found out quickly that he wasn't the soft-spoken, intelligent kind of nerd, but the rub-it-in-your-face, know-it-all kind of nerd. A dork, if you will. His main topic of interest was always girls, what they were wearing, how we would rate them out of 10, who the hottest young actress was at any given moment, etc. Also, he stunk bad, like rotten watermelons. You know when you leave fruit out for too long and it gets all spicy and sour? He smelled how that tastes. Fortunately, I've never had to deal with Tim for too long at a time. Usually he just gets bored and harasses someone else. Although I noticed that he liked to target me specifically during senior year, I guess he thought he could fill the vacant spot in my two-person friend group by showing off his interests, seeing as he didn't have any friends himself. Truth be told, it made me feel a little bad for him now that I was in his spot. That's why I made the worst decision of my life. I decided to hang out with him for a day. I was by my locker and ready to head home from school when Tim waddled up to me, his belly hanging out of his ill-fitting Sonic shirt. "Hey, Anna." "Tim, I swear to God if it's more..." No, it's not. Promise. I forgot to bring catgirls with me anyway." "What a shame." "Yeah, I know. Anyways, my mom's out for the night. She got another DUI and has to stay in jail until tomorrow morning. Fucking pigs." "Oh, well, I'm really sorry about that. Tim, I was thinking that maybe we could hang out tonight." "Why no? Just you and me. I've got the new Tekken." "You like Tekken, right?" I did like Tekken, although I wasn't sure how he knew that. I was about to reply when Tim interrupted. "Oh, I can buy dinner, too. Any place you want. McDonald's, KFC, Arby's." "That's really nice of you, but I'm going to be a little busy with homework tonight." "But the year just started. It's only the first week. How much homework could you possibly be getting?" Shit, he got me there. Tim was practically begging on his knees by this point. "Please, I promise it'll only be a few hours. Everyone else was busy, so you're the last friend I haven't asked." I sighed, staring blankly into the vent of my locker. "Fine, but only for a few hours." Tim pumped his fist in the air, rushing over to his locker. When he opened it, I saw that its interior was completely covered in old Playboy and anime pin-ups. He took his backpack out and hung it over his shoulder, grinning from ear to ear. "All right, my house is at 1028 XXXXX Avenue. Come around 6I to 6:30. See you then." With that, he walked towards the exit door, but not before stopping behind me. "Bueno, Anna, you have really beautiful eyes." Giggling like a madman, he ran past the lockers and out the front exit. Jesus, what did I get myself into? Waiting for 6 was like watching a time bomb tick down. I knew there was no going back on my promise. That was for sure. I texted Ellie in anticipation, just to share my pain with someone else. "Yikes. Praying for you, girlie," she answered. "Yikes indeed." I checked my watch. 5:45. Shit. I should probably start the car. As I hesitantly hopped in my ride, thoughts of cowardice raced through my head. I could say I was sick, or that there was a family emergency, or, no, he'd never believe me. The inky September roads treated me well at first, but gradually deteriorated into strips of potholes and rough cracks. I rarely drove to this part of town, especially not alone, and to see it this late was a tad unnerving. The derelict houses lined the block like warped dominoes, each ready to topple on top of each other. 1028. 1028. I saw a 1023 back that way. Shit. Fortunately, I found the address. Unfortunately, it was attached to a house that I had to stay in for hours, lest I betray the only person who reached out to hang with me. Maybe I was the asshole all along. The Chambers household was only a few steps above a meth lab. The house itself looked worn, wood panels specked with grime and moss. There was a large shed in the backyard, in a condition no better than the house. I warily walked up the decaying front steps and knocked on the front door. No doorbell. Of course. Within seconds, I heard heavy footsteps from inside the house, accompanied by a deep, raspy bark. The door opened, and there stood Tim, Mountain Dew in hand. Dude, you made it! Yep. So where do I put my coat and stuff? Just put it in my room. Don't leave it near the door. Rex might piss on it. He's not house-trained yet. As he said that, he pointed toward an emaciated pit bull sitting in the corner. Beside him was a dog bowl filled with disgusting red muck, which I assumed was his food. We used to have a cat, too. Rex isn't so good with cats. Tim chuckled to himself as he beckoned me upstairs. Following him, I grabbed the handrail, only to realize it was wet with grease. We don't get to clean often. You'll get used to it, said Tim as he trudged over to his bedroom. I wiped the stain on my pant leg and went in after him. Reaching the doorway, I stood in shock. I had made a huge mistake. Tim's room was covered floor to ceiling in pin-ups, vintage Playboys, manga, and even some Instagram pictures of girls from our school were printed out and taped to the walls. Welcome. Hope it's not too hot in here, if you know what I mean. Tim laughed, wiping some Cheeto dust off his jacket. I stepped forward an inch, only to feel something squishy beneath my feet. A body pillow. Of course. Trust me, Anna, there's stuff in this room you can't find anywhere else, he said, bringing out a box of VHS tapes from his closet. He dug around and pulled out a tape with some anime girl on it. Now this one is good. Lotta great action from every angle, I think. Tim, we've talked about this. Repeatedly. I'm not interested. He pouted a bit and dropped the tape back into the box. Sure. My mistake. Want to play Tekken? Before I had the chance to mutter some bullshit excuse on why I had to leave, he pulled me by the arm and sat me down in front of the TV. It was a tiny thing, not much bigger than one from the 80s or 90s. Sorry about the crappy TV. The other one is being used right now. I just nodded, waiting for the clock to let me escape this hell. He turned the console on and handed me a controller, taking a seat entirely too close to me. We picked our characters, me choosing one of the girls, and started the match. Tim, unsurprisingly, yammered on throughout the whole game. Pretty elaborate decorations, I know. Hey, a guy has his interests. Sure. Thanks. But you know what pisses me off? Females don't appreciate this stuff like guys do. Seriously. Why can they cover their rooms in shitty boy band posters and celebrities, but guys can't do the same? It's bullshit. Yeah. I mean, it's not for lack of trying. I've been available for years. He sighed. He was spin-kicking me into oblivion by this point in the game, winning the first round easily. It's not like I'm missing out on much anyway. Most chicks nowadays are like fish. You know, cut off the head, keep the body. Tim snickered at his own joke. Okay. The next match started. He kept wailing on my character, locking her into a chain of pain. He continued. They're inconsiderate. Plain and simple. They wouldn't know a gentleman if it hit him in the face. Cool. "Hey, are you listening?" he said as he turned towards me. Yeah, I agree. With, like, everything you said. Good. Why no? People in the West just don't take care of themselves anymore. It's sad," he said, Cheeto spit dribbling from his lips. "I can't imagine why you're not more popular," I muttered. "I know. Crazy world. People wonder why we're so addicted to technology. It's because real females aren't appealing anymore. They've started loving themselves more than their man. Bad. Bad deal." I rolled my eyes a little at this. Big mistake. Tim paused the game mid-match, glaring at me with beady eyes. He opened his mouth, rancid breath wafting up my nostrils. "I feel like you're not taking this seriously. I'm pouring my heart out to you, and you can't even be bothered to pay attention. Whatever. I'm sure you'll be reporting back to Chad's house in due time." "Who the fuck is Chad?" "He's not a person. He's an idea. A symbol for all the assholes that..." Barely containing my laughter, I set down my controller and yawned. "It's been great. Tim, really, but I have to go," I said, getting up off the floor. Tim put a tubby hand out in front of him, signaling me to stop. "Wait, I have one more thing to show you. I think you're gonna like it." "I'm sure I would, but I really have to..." "It's about Ellie." I stopped in my tracks. "Ellie?" "Yep. She gave me something she wanted me to show you." "Where? Where is it?" "Over in the shed. It's huge." On one hand, I wanted to see whatever she had given him. On the other hand, there was no way I was going to his creepy shed alone. "Well, maybe you can just give it to me at school tomorrow," I said. As I headed for the doorway, I felt a heavy object collide with the side of my head, holding the wall for support. It came down on me again, bringing me to the floor. My vision grew darker and darker. The decision had been made for me. I opened my eyes and was met with blackness. The only thing I knew for certain was that I was tied to a chair. I felt my arms and legs chafing against thin rope. With my hands resting in fuzzy handcuffs on my lap, a piece of tape covered my mouth, stifling any potential vocalizations for help. I felt tiny, prickly feet scaling my legs. Looking down, I saw what they belonged to: silverfish. The room was absolutely infested with them, the dampness of the floor and walls providing a haven for the little piss ants. Glancing around, I was able to register that this was some kind of basement or bunker underneath the shed, judging by the wooden ceiling above me. Next to me was a table with various tools, positioned underneath a large saw blade jutting out from the wall. I turned my attention to the other side of the room. There seemed to be a person sitting on a chair in the corner, although I could only see their silhouette. Somebody else was behind me, standing still against the back wall. Suddenly, a familiar voice echoed from the room in front of me. "Sorry for making you wait so long. I was just getting ready. Gotta look presentable. You know." It was unmistakably Tim. His face peeked out from the corner of the room, his cracked and rotted teeth forming a wide smile. Waddling up to me, he put his hands on my shoulders and gave a throaty laugh. "Hope you didn't get conked too hard. I just need your opinion on something, if that's okay. See, I'm having trouble deciding what she should wear," he said, pointing to the person sitting in the corner. "I've been thinking something gothic, like a corset or a funeral dress." "Ah, you know what? I'll let you see for yourself." He walked over to the nearest light switch, flipping it on. Once my eyes adjusted to the brightness, I could clearly see the person in the chair, or what was left of her. When you meet a new person, the first thing you notice are their eyes. It's how we make non-verbal connections, how we read another person past a simple hello. What I was met with was a dim reflection of my own face. The woman in the chair had no head. In its place was an old television combo unit with a slot at the bottom for a tape. The body connected to it was that of an older woman wearing a plain white gown that went down to her ankles. Wires and cables ran up and down her person like thin tendrils, entangling her in a circuit that ended in the soulless screen I saw before me. Iron supports held the unit in place so that she didn't topple over from the sheer weight of the device. I was thinking to myself, the body's fine, but the face could use a little work. I'm sure she would agree. Tim laughed. He walked back over to the room he came out of, returning with his box of VHS tapes and a TV remote. Check this out. He pulled a random tape out of the box and placed it in the VCR slot. The screen flickered to life, fuzzy at first, but soon focused. It showed a picture, probably taken from one of Tim's videos or magazines, of a beautiful woman with vibrant red hair. You could only see her from the neck up, and was directly facing the camera, almost like a mugshot. Cool, isn't it? I'm a big redhead guy myself, but discriminate I do not. Smiling, Tim pressed a button on his remote, changing the image to an attractive blonde shot in a similar way. Glancing to me as if seeking approval, he pressed the button again, and again, and again, and again, and again. Brunettes, redheads, blondes, younger, older. I even recognized some celebrities in the mix. Eventually, he landed on a goth-looking girl with heavy makeup. Talk about a boob tube. Right. Anyway, I was thinking about something like this, paired with some Hot Topic clothes. I think it would look really good. Nod yes if you like it. No if you don't. I wasn't about to partake in Tim's little face-swapping experiment, so I stayed completely still, growing impatient. He turned off the TV and bent down to meet my eyes. I should have known you wouldn't cooperate. Guess I'll have to figure it out myself. Then, regardless, that's not why I brought you down here. He turned my chair around, putting his plump, greasy hands over my eyes. All right, I'll count to 3. Ready? 1, 2. He removed his digits from my face, one by one. 3. I didn't register what was in front of me at first. It looked like some shapeless blob of flesh. But upon closer inspection, it had a vague resemblance to a human body. Arms, legs, and a torso were present, but they all seemed stiff and artificial. It seemed like a doll or pillow of some sort, only instead of silk or cotton, a thick layer of human skin clung to its form. The stitching was poorly done, with flaps of raw flesh hanging off the body like leaves on a rose. The hair was attached to the scalp in brown clumps that were rapidly falling off. Atop its head were a pair of real cat's ears, black in color. They appeared to be sewn on haphazardly, with one ear slightly askew. Its mouth was permanently in an O shape, with its lack of teeth accentuating its strange look. But the most uncanny part of all were the eyes, or the lack of them. 2 gaping holes filled the upper part of its face, starkly contrasting the light skin. Tim put his hands on the thing's shoulders, speaking again. Say hello to Ellie. I know it's been a while. I would have vomited, but the duct tape wouldn't let me. I knew you'd love it. She was always such a beautiful girl, although you might be wondering why she's incomplete. Tim shrugged and let out a chuckle. Truth be told, nothing above the neck impressed me. Butterface City, am I right? I figured I could do some experimenting, swapping different assets and such. Then I saw your eyes. Your eyes are orbs of perfection, my lady, and since you two were so compatible personality-wise, I figured you might be physically compatible, too. I had to hold back tears. I couldn't show any weakness in front of this monster. Don't cry, Anna. What you're experiencing is beauty in its purest form, he crooned. He pulled out a rusty-looking scalpel from his pocket and tapped it on the back of the chair. A smirk graced his pimpled face. But first, time to say goodbye. Tim walked over to the corpse doll and grabbed her by the back of the head. He shoved the doll's face in mine, directing its lips to my cheeks. The sick odor of death permeated my nostrils as he tried to mime the doll kissing me. Oh, look, she loves you, squealed Tim as I felt Ellie's lipstick stain my face. There was only one way I could get out of this. In between the assaults, I rammed my head into his as hard as I could. He staggered back in pain, dropping both Ellie and his scalpel, the tool falling directly on my lap. Tim was covering his head with his hands, combing his digits through his oily hair. I grabbed the scalpel with what little dexterity my bound hands had left and tried my best to cut through the rope binding my arms. Unfortunately, my grip wasn't tight enough to leave a mark. He was getting steady now, ready to lunge towards me in rage. He charged forward, tackling me and splintering the chair with his immense weight. Pointing the scalpel towards him, I made a weak stabbing motion, hoping to hit any part of him. The blade jammed into his exposed underbelly, leaving a crimson gash across his lower stomach. He roared in pain, gripping the wound with both hands to stop the bleeding. I slashed again, hitting his right arm this time. He toppled over on his side, rolling around in agony. I tried to cut the other ropes in the meantime, working the bloodied scalpel across my restraints as well as I could. With a few of the armbands chopped, I could more easily reach my leg restraints. I looked over to Tim, still writhing in his own juices. He kept trying to get up, but every attempt ended with him crashing to the ground. I severed the rest of my bonds, allowing me to finally stand up. Still wearing the handcuffs, I ran over to the saw blade and cracked the chain over it. Luckily for me, these were cheaper play cuffs, so they snapped easily. Tim, now sallow and frail, had also gotten to his feet. He shuffled towards me, a manic grin filling his tubby face. Suddenly, he let out a wet, phlegmy cough, and his breathing started to become rattly and uneven. He still kept walking. I picked up the back piece of the broken chair, hoping to end things as humanely as possible. Holding the plank over my head, I prepared to land the finishing blow. Tim's eyes were wide as saucers, and for a brief moment I saw some humanity in them. He had the pleading look of a toddler who just stole a cookie from the cookie jar, the look of an eternal child that had not yet been warped by vice and envy. I saw his story written on his face and lodged within his wounds, but only for a moment. The board crashed down on his head, sending him face first into the concrete. He lay there like a beached whale, breathing shakily before stopping altogether. I turned to the room he originally came out of, looking for any possible exit. Sure enough, there was a wooden door in the back of the room. Walking towards it, I noticed two phones sitting side by side on a table next to the door, one blue and one pink. The blue one was mine, and I recognized the other as Ellie's. I took both, checking mine first. It seemed to have been untouched by Tim. Ellie's, on the other hand, had clearly been in his possession for a while. He had changed the background to that disgusting skin doll, I guess as some sort of sick joke. The messaging app was filled to the brim with worried texts from her family members, wondering where she and her parents were over the last few days. Tim must have been responding to these as Ellie to try and assuage their fears. Grimacing, I took both devices and exited through the door. Upon heading through, I was met with stairs leading up to a hatch affixed to the shed's floor. From there, escaping the makeshift dungeon was simple. The only thing left to do was get help. The police came within minutes of calling. I directed them to the shed, making sure to show them where the entrance to the underground area was. The TV woman was identified as Ellie's mother, most likely killed at the same time she was. The body of her father was not found in its entirety, but traces of human flesh were found in the various dog food bowls throughout the house. The family was, in truth, not planning to move. I guess Tim himself started that rumor to cover his tracks. Tim's mom, as expected, claimed to know none of this was going on, saying that she only really went outside to get groceries or go to the bar, which is where she spent most of her time. The hatch was for a storage area that she thought they'd never use, so she paid it no mind. Tim himself was pronounced dead from blood loss and was hastily removed from the scene. I assume his destination will be an unmarked grave, but who knows? As for me, I'm fine. I've been living life as best I can, trying to remember all the good times I had with Ellie. Every so often, I get an old yearbook out and flip through it for nostalgia's sake. Seeing those ancient pictures of me from first grade is quite a trip. I noticed something in last year's book, though. I went to the back page with all the signatures from my year, and out of the corner of my eye, I glanced a name written in red ink. Tim Chambers. Written above the name was a brief message. Anna, thanks for being a great friend. After what happened, they called me a vigilante, but that's not right. I had reasons of my own for being out that night, and they had nothing to do with patrolling the neighborhood or protecting the innocent. The truth is, I was looking for a fight. I wanted to be attacked. I wanted to get wrapped up in violence. The sort of violence that doesn't end until at least one of the people involved is dead. That was my grand plan, my escape hatch. My way out of a life that had left only bitterness in its wake and misery in its future. I understood that there were easier ways to end my life if I really wanted to. But the problem was that they came without excuses. If I offed myself, the blame would be on me, and forcing a police officer or subway conductor to cause my death might send an innocent person's life into the same downward spiral that mine had been in for the past 5 years. No, I wanted to either kill or be killed by someone who deserved what was coming to them. I had it all planned out. There was something exhilarating about walking out of my dingy one-bedroom apartment at midnight with empty pockets, knowing that if everything went according to plan, I wouldn't ever be coming back. I already lived in a dangerous neighborhood. It was the only place I could afford. The streets were poorly lit. There was almost no police presence, and just a few of the street corners saw more murders in a year than some small towns. From midnight until 4 a.m., I wandered every corner of those trash-cluttered alleys and explored abandoned, graffiti-covered factories, waiting, hoping to be someone's target. It wasn't as easy as I thought. Something had changed about the streets after midnight. The street corner gangs seemed almost more afraid of me than I was of them, and usually scattered when I came near. Even junkies scrambled away when they saw me approach. I didn't get it. I was just one skinny guy in a black hoodie. If they had jumped me, it would have been over in 5 minutes flat. But something about my dark, lonely figure filled them with fear. When I heard running footsteps behind me on the third night, I felt my body tense up with excitement. This was it. It was finally happening. But the scrawny drug addict who slammed into me from behind didn't try to rob or attack me. He just barreled past. His pupils widened by more than amphetamines. His face was cratered by scabs and weeping sores. In the light-polluted glow of the city sky, it made him look almost zombie-like. I glanced over my shoulder, wondering what he had seen to make him so afraid. But the alley he'd come from was completely dark. For a second, I almost went back to investigate, but some instinct made me hesitate. Something was moving in that darkness. I was sure of it. I also wondered about the owners of grimy basement bars who would suddenly turn out their neon signs, shutter their windows, and lock their doors with clients inside only to reopen their doors half an hour later. I wondered about the grotesque sculptures I had started to find in abandoned lots in the neighborhood, made of discarded animal parts. One was made up of the severed head of a dead dog, the ripped-off wings of a crow, and the body of a nude plastic baby doll. In another, the intestines of some large animal dangled from the head of a supermarket mannequin like some ghastly interpretation of a snake. Whatever they meant, they hadn't happened by accident. Something was happening in the neighborhood, and as time passed, discovering what it was became almost as important to me as the grim end that I had come looking for. I wanted to know why bands of cold-eyed young men would suddenly cross the street beside the empty park, as though scared by their own shadows. I wanted to know why, no matter how empty the streets there appeared to be, I always had the feeling that I was being followed. I never saw anyone, not exactly, but I was sure that out there, in the abyss between the streetlights, something horrible was lurking. My fantasies had involved being stabbed in a knife fight or sentenced to life in prison after beating some drug dealer to death, not of whatever it might do to me. As the days grew colder and shorter, I began to realize that there were far worse things than death or jail. As much as I feared whatever haunted those streets, however, I was equally drawn to it, like a moth to a flame. Despite dumpster diving for food and the unpaid bills that kept piling up inside my mail slot, I felt more alive than I had in years. I was supposed to be dead by now, and yet I had to know. The only problem was, my amateur investigation seemed to have reached a standstill. The vomit splattered. Piss-reeking drunks who I interrogated gave vague half-answers that not even the promise of cash could turn around. They knew more than they were telling. I could feel it. No one wanted to acknowledge what was happening, but the fear in their eyes was obvious. It felt like I was beating my head against one of the crumbling, graffiti-covered factory walls, until the night I met the creator of those 6 sculptures. When I stumbled in on him, he was putting the finishing touches on his latest project, an opera mask stitched to the corpse of a dead raccoon, with the plastic hands of dozens of tiny toys sticking out from its rotted ribcage. He was trying to hang it from a light post. I shouted and moved toward him. He ran, making his construction crash with a splatter onto the pavement. He scrambled up a chain-link fence and vaulted into an overgrown lot. I pursued, tripping over shapeless lumps in the dark. The lot seemed like it had been some sort of dumping ground for a garage or factory. Whole cars rusted on concrete blocks beside heaps of unidentifiable junk. I was halfway across it before I realized that the slim figure in the navy blue hoodie that I was chasing had disappeared. I began to wonder whether following him into such an isolated place had been such a good idea after all. I had always imagined my death or arrest being on the evening news, my disappointed parents and alienated friends shaking their heads at fate. But here, my corpse would be feeding strays for weeks or years before anyone even noticed that I was missing. I peered around the heaps of junk, wondering where he could have gone. In the split second before the hunk of metal slammed into my chest, I identified it as an old fire extinguisher. Stars exploded in front of my eyes and I went down hard in the knee-high weeds, heard the crunch of decomposing wood and metal beneath my dead weight. Then, suddenly, I was more than just stunned and hurting. I was angry. I got to my knees and rammed into my assailant. To my surprise, he went flying, crashing into the ground with a grunt. I flung myself on top of him, a loose hunk of concrete in my hand. His hood fell back as I lifted my improvised weapon. He was just a kid. He couldn't have been more than 14. Signs of abuse and mental illness covered his face, but what hurt the most was how he looked up at me, like this was nothing unusual. Like this was more or less exactly how he'd expected to die. Huffing, at a loss for words, I asked him what the hell he thought he was doing. Making monsters, he told me, to protect us from the real one. I helped the boy to his feet. He said his name was Eli. During the day, his mother homeschooled him, so he didn't have to go to what he called the special room at the local public school, but she worked nights. And while she was gone, he climbed out the window to decorate the neighborhood with his creations. No one cares about us, Eli explained. When we go missing, people think it's normal, but it's not. He pulled a crumpled paper out of his pocket and jammed it into my hand. Then he was gone, slipping past me and into the night. He had given me a crumpled sheet of children's construction paper. 4 names and faces cut out from newspapers had been pasted to it. Marius Brown, Clayton Gaines, Chandra Witt, Rosalia Velasquez. As the sun came up that morning, I plugged them into a search engine. They were all people who'd gone missing in the neighborhood during the past year. I recognized one of them. Clayton Gaines was the terrified junkie who had slammed into me as he ran from something that I couldn't see. The people who had vanished had little in common. Marius had been an amateur DJ, Chandra a hairdresser, and Rosalia a night shift security guard. The only thing the 4 of them shared was the fact that they had all disappeared in the same 6-block radius between 1 and 5 a.m. In any other area, those circumstances would have inspired a hunt for a serial killer. But crime was so commonplace in the neighborhood that the police had chosen to ignore the coincidences completely. Maybe it was obsession, or maybe it was simply lack of sleep. But the priorities of my nightly walks were beginning to change. I no longer cared about entangling myself in a problem grave enough to end my disappointing existence. I wanted to know what was going on. The problem was, none of the night denizens of the neighborhood were willing to talk about it. The moment I mentioned one of the names, people turned away from me like I was cursed. Some got violent. When I asked a bouncer outside a seedy strip club if he'd seen anything unusual lately, he shoved me so hard I fell off the curb and hit my skull on the asphalt of the potholed street, with his "get the fuck out of here" still ringing in my ears. I pushed myself to my feet and staggered off. It hadn't been the fight I'd imagined, and I hadn't seen it coming, but I had been hurt bad. When I touched the back of my head, my hand came away red. And that wasn't all. I felt lightheaded, dizzy, not even able to stick to the uneven sidewalks as I wandered down the foggy, deserted streets. At one point, glass shattered behind me. Someone had thrown a bottle. My vision swam. I could see another dark open space ahead. But this was no abandoned lot. It was a historically protected cemetery, ringed by a waist-high iron fence. Most of the tombstones had long since been defaced or kicked over, but something about the idea of silence and soft grass was suddenly, hypnotically irresistible. I lurched over the fence to lay in the darkness behind the cemetery's storage shed. I could feel my heartbeat in my skull, could taste the irony flavor of blood between my teeth. This was it. I had gotten what I'd wanted all along, an ignoble death in a forgotten part of town, only to discover that it wasn't at all like I had imagined. The world had begun to seem so vast, incredible, and strange, so worthy of being explored and appreciated. I passed out, but only for a few minutes. The cemetery was still dark when I woke up. At first, I wasn't sure what had awoken me. Then the old drunk's sad out-of-tune song reached me. He was wandering down the middle of the street in front of the cemetery in an eerie reenactment of what I had just been doing. But he wasn't alone. A woman was approaching him from the shadows of a boarded-up store on the corner, lost in his own world. He didn't see her coming. Not even she was close enough to touch him. She stood behind the grizzled old man as he lowered his torn jeans to piss on a fire hydrant. It was the closeness that bothered me the most. The way she stood perfectly still, so near that the old drunk should have felt her breath on his neck. Oblivious, he pulled up his pants mostly and staggered back toward the street. He never made it that far. Because of my head injury, I can't swear that the next part happened exactly how I remember it. All I know is what I saw. The woman's neck seemed to stretch somehow, arching over her prey like a snake preparing to attack. Then she struck, chomping on the man's face and neck until he crumpled, lifeless, to the ground, with her teeth still embedded in his right cheek and her neck still gruesomely extended several feet beyond its natural length. She began to drag him toward me. I pushed myself to my hands and knees, looking desperately for a place to hide. From behind a gnarled cypress tree, I watched as the woman pulled herself effortlessly over the fence. She was so close now that I could hear the slick, heavy sound of the old drunk's corpse sliding across the wet grass, digging her bare fingers into the dirt. She began to dig. An ordinary person's fingers would have bent and broken, their nails peeling away from skin in bloody strips. But still she dug on, clawing at the dirt like a rabid animal. A clump of still warm dirt splattered across my cheek as the pit she was digging grew deeper. The woman was below the surface by the time I realized what she was doing. She was going to bury the body. Just like this old man, the people who had disappeared would never leave this neighborhood. They were here, buried along with who knew how many others. The thought struck me just as the woman's head rose up from the hole she had dug. Just as before, her neck distorted gruesomely as it rose 2, 3, 6 feet above her body, searching for something. Her head coiled in circles through the damp night air like a serpent made of human skin. From where I crouched in the dead leaves of the cypress tree, a sound reached me sniffing. Could she smell me? My blood, my heartbeat. I began to creep backwards, as slowly and quietly as I dared. The cemetery was just a single city block in size, but the short iron fence behind me felt miles away. In just 1 or 2 more sweeps of that hideous rope-like neck, the woman and I would be face to face, even though her body was still perched like a carrion bird in the shallow grave she'd just finished digging. As her head searched, her body dragged the drunk inside, its hands covering him methodically with dirt. I winced as my foot connected with the iron rails of the fence. The sound of digging stopped. The woman's body slithered up from the shallow grave it was digging, and her head froze in mid-air, staring straight at me. She moved faster than I would have ever thought possible. The spiked fence stabbed into my leg as I heaved myself over it and onto the sidewalk. I ignored the pain. The thinking part of my brain was no longer in control, like a deer chased by wolves or a seal before the jaws of a shark. I was just another prey animal fleeing from a predator. Still dizzy from my head injury, I weaved drunkenly, staggering as I fled. It was only a matter of time. I tripped on the uneven sidewalk and sprawled face first on the concrete. In the yellow glow of the streetlights, the shadow of the woman's stretched neck hung over me. Drool and gore from her last victim dribbled down, splattering on my face and shoulders. I think I screamed, but I couldn't have said for sure. Just before I shut my eyes to accept my fate, another monstrous shadow fell over. Its pale face was human, with butcher knives sticking out where the eyes should have been. Ragged strands of something black hung from its back like a vile imitation of wings. It thrust itself at my attacker's hovering head, rattling like a pile of old bones. The woman paused, then retreated, backing away slowly into the night, like the fading of a bad dream. I looked up at the new horror, noticing for the first time that it wasn't quite what it seemed. It wasn't moving on its own. In fact, it hung from the end of a long fiberglass pole, the sort custodians use to change light bulbs on high ceilings. At the end of the pole was a short figure covered by a black shroud. Even before he threw back the blanket that covered him, I knew who it was, Eli, with another one of his creepy creations. I told you there were real monsters, Eli mumbled. A siren wailed somewhere in the distance. The wind sighed through the twisted cypress trees of the cemetery. Whatever stalked the streets of the neighborhood was gone for now. I got a brief spot in a local newspaper for pointing out to the police where the bodies were buried. But after that, my life went back to normal, except for one thing. My goals had changed. There was something more important to me than using a violent death to escape my problems. I wanted to see Eli succeed. I wanted to make sure that he made it out of the neighborhood, and that he got his art in front of people who would appreciate it. After all, he had saved me from 2 monsters that night, and one of them was myself. Thank you for venturing into the darkness with us. If you dare to explore further, be sure to subscribe to our channel for more spine-tingling tales of horror and the supernatural. Remember, the shadows hold endless mysteries, waiting to be unveiled. Stay tuned for more bone-chilling stories as we continue to traverse the eerie depths of the unknown together. Until next time, may your dreams be free from the haunting echoes of our tales. Or perhaps not.